Question number 4, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, what is the value of contracts entered into to date for spending on advertising, communications and banking services relating to the government's asset sales program?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, the actual total amounts of contracts are commercially sensitive, and the reason for that is because the government intends to renegotiate these contracts after each float. As we have said before, though, costs for all suppliers and contractors across the entire share offer program, and that's not just the Mighty River Power one, are expected to be around 2% of the total program proceeds, which is very low by market standards. To date, about $800,000 has actually been paid out pursuant to those contracts.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he know the value of the contract signed earlier this year with Clemenger to provide advertising services relating to the government's asset sales program? And why does the public not have a right to know how much the government is spending Clemenger for that advertising?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in due course, that will become public. I would expect it is a significant spend because we want widespread ownership of these shares by New Zealanders. Not many New Zealanders actually know about Mighty River Power or about the nature of their business. So we would be expecting to spend on an advertising campaign to make sure New Zealanders do know about the opportunity that they have. But I would expect in the long run that those numbers will be available. Bear in mind that in the current environment the government can get good rates for all these services, and we would expect to continuously renegotiate the contracts to drive the price down.
The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
To the Minister, are the expensive advertising consultants responsible for the statement on the government share offer website that, quote, persons who are accessing this website from within Australia should exit the website immediately, unquote? And if so, is that all the protection he's planning against these assets being sold off to Australians?
The Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr. Speaker, and I think the member's question illustrates the fact that he doesn't take the securities law of New Zealand seriously. In fact, not only does the website has to comply with New Zealand securities law, Australian securities law and US securities law because of their requirements, not ours. And we are, as a sovereign, obliged to comply with their law, whatever they think of it.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What exactly is the nature of Senate Communications' role in the asset sales program, and why is it necessary to have spin doctors from a public relations firm involved when the government already has press secretaries and Treasury staff working on the asset sale program?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, I can't tell the member the detail of the role of that particular contractor. What I can say is that the government is committed to widespread New Zealand ownership of these companies. They are not as well known in New Zealand as many politicians certainly assume, and it's important that we do communicate with the wider public consistent with the securities law. We communicate with the wider public about these companies and the nature of their business.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the upper limit that he's willing to spend on loyalty schemes around this privatisation program, given that the loyalty scheme associated with Queensland Rail privatisation cost about 6% of the proceeds, which in the case of his privatisations would cost something around $400 million?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we don't want to jump to conclusions about the detail of loyalty schemes because the government is still considering that option along with others. What we are going to do, consistent with what the government said right back in January last year, is make this offer as attractive to as many New Zealanders as possible. And New Zealanders will be interested in these assets, but they'll want to understand how the deal works for them, and the government is considering options that would help attract the most possible New Zealanders into the ownership of these assets.
Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, what reports has he seen about other publicly funded contracts let in relation to the government's sales program?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, I've seen some reports that initially I didn't believe, actually, that the Green Party was using $75,000 of public money to pay for people to collect signatures for a referendum to stop the asset sales, which I think tells us that actually most New Zealanders aren't, while they may be uncomfortable about the sales, we're finding that you actually have to pay a public contract to get them to sign a referendum. So probably they're not that motivated as the Green Party would like.
Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I want to hear this supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that it is on the...
Order. I apologise to the member. I cannot hear the supplementary question. I want to hear it. Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Green Party has gone on the public record as to how much spending we are doing to opposing the state asset sale program, why is his government not willing to tell the public how much they are planning to spend on spin doctors, advertising and banking fees in the privatisation program?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course that information will be available, but I think it sums up the difference between the parties. We're getting on to get things done, and the Greens, as usual, are just trying to stop anything happening. And in this case, using public money to try to stop anything happening. And it is a bit odd that the Greens used to support citizen-initiated referendum, whereas now we're paying for Greens-initiated referendums.
Sorry, is this a supplementary question? The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Is the public to understand that as well as the 120 million figure that Mr. Key gave to Mr. Shearer, and that's 120 million of spending on advertising, communication and banking services related to selling the assets, to this has to be added the Burl and other estimate of 100 million losses that will ensue to the government's revenue stream, even though the man over there with the follically challenged head doesn't like it, when they are sold. Well, he's chipping away. That will ensure to the government's revenue stream when they are sold. And how would any reputable financial manager follow such a course of action?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member's welcome to comment on his Labour opposition any time he likes, as far as we're concerned. All I can say is this: if the member believes any of that, then we are waiting to hear in this chamber this week that the Labour Party and New Zealand First are going to buy the assets back. It's not off the table, or is it on the table? Well, by the end of this week, that's what we're expecting to hear.
Supplementary.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Mr.
Speaker. Look, Mr. Speaker, I've been very, very reserved today, as you will have noticed. But I asked him to reconcile a $220 million figure.
Order. If the member wants to get particular answers to his questions, you'll just have to be more disciplined. I'm not going to support a member in seeking answers to questions if they refer to other members of the House in a disparaging manner. Remedies in members' own hands. Avoid unnecessary comments and asking questions, and I'll promise the member I'll get answers for him, but I can't when disparaging comments are made while a question is being asked.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Right Honourable Winston.
Mr. Speaker, with the greatest respect to the freedom and character of this House, if somebody over there is chipping away at the whole of question time, then he invites such a comment.
Order.
And I'm happy to give it.
Order. Order. The member's senior enough and been around the place enough not to let more junior members upset him by the odd interjection around the House. And order, I'm on my feet. I'm on my feet. And the comments will cease. But I think that members have to be disciplined in asking questions if I'm able to elicit answers for them. Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. given that the government has already acknowledged they're spending $120 million on communications, public relations and banking services, and that in addition to that they could spend another $400 million on loyalty schemes, does he believe it is a good use of government money to spend up to $500 million on the privatisation program?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, I just don't agree with the Minister's numbers that he's using. But yes, the government is committed to a process that is going to give us 51% government ownership, 49% public float, and help us to avoid $7 billion more of borrowing. And we think that is worth an effort to do a good job of it. Widespread New Zealand ownership. We'd rather pay dividends to New Zealanders as opposed to the Green Party who want to pay interest to foreigners. That's the difference.
Dr. Russell.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is he aware that according to the now former senior Goldman Sachs executive Greg Smith, Goldman Sachs internally described their clients as Muppets, and hence does that make this New Zealand government a Muppet for using Goldman Sachs to manage the privatisation program?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, no.
Question number 5, Dr. Paul Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister